I think that we each have a higher purpose in life that's probably unique to ourselves. I think that it can change throughout our life. If we don't know what our higher purpose is, like what do we want? Like what do we need? What's our soul saying to us, or our inner self, our base intuition saying that it wants or needs to do that most fits and aligns with what we are as a being. So mine may be helping other people find their way, you know, and it's if we can find it, that's great. We should work on finding it, figuring out what it is. But then once we know it, once we figure out what our higher purpose is, how is it aligned with our daily life? Are we living our higher purpose? Is it aligned with how we live our life? Are our values that we have things that we're actually doing and living? And is it especially aligned with our vocation or job, because we spend so much time at work? So if we're not doing something that aligns with what we want to do and want to be or need to be, then we're going to be, I think, extremely unhappy.
The Tom Screen podcast is owned and made possible by Ethical Marketing Service. If your business is struggling with Google or Facebook ads, maybe you're frustrated figuring it out, or there's a performance issue, Ethical Marketing Service has worked on hundreds of accounts and we can help in this area. If you would like to find out if we can help, it's a free, no salesy consultation call, and the link is in the description. Enjoy the episode. Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the episode today, we have John Lawyer. John, welcome.
Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate you having me on your show.
I am very happy to have you. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I am a spiritual guide and also a seeker, a student as well. And I run a nonprofit online spiritual community with my wife and another good friend of ours in the Balkans. And our goal is to provide a meaningful, authentic, and safe place for people to share spiritual journeys and come together and kind of see what their own unique path has to offer and support one another and try to have a better conversation about spirituality in the digital age.
Thank you for the introduction. I don't know if you know this about my podcast, but I do enjoy speaking to military people. I've spoken to a lot of them before, and it's something about the discipline side of that life that I really admire. But there's obviously a before and after in relation to your story, in the sense that you've gone from that life to something more spiritual. Would you mind starting with where you were before in terms of what's significant to you?
Sure. I joined the U.S. Army straight out of high school, skipped college, and I enlisted as a counterintelligence special agent. I went to basic training, got my job training, and then after I got to my permanent duty station, I was there for probably 6 months, and then 9/11 happened. And so kind of my whole world changed, the world of my kind of brothers and sisters in arms. And we were at war. And so I spent about half my 5-year enlistment, so about 2.5 years in Kuwait as a soldier, doing counterintelligence, counterterrorism work. And I continued to do that work when I got out of the Army as well as a civilian. And actually, my wife was a soldier as well, and we were together for most of these trips. And so I also spent 18 months in Baghdad, Iraq, and I spent about 6.5 years consecutively in Kandahar, Afghanistan. So, like I said, doing counterintelligence work, counterterrorism, and in Afghanistan, especially involved in like asymmetric warfare. And our job there was to protect Kandahar Airfield, which at the time was the busiest single runway on planet Earth. The planes landing every 30 seconds, taking off. And so we had to keep the airfield green and protect people and protect the aircraft and such. And so it was kind of my youth, I spent 12 out of 15 years of the first 15 years of my adult life overseas in combat zones at war, exposed to lots of low grade trauma, periodically exposed to some fairly high grade trauma. And you don't realize it kind of when you're in the boiling pot situation, but obviously when I got done with that, and my wife and I, when we came home, There was a lot of healing to do and a lot of kind of a loss of identity. And um, it probably took me about 7 years to kind of find my bearings. And then uh, at one point, I just kind of had a moment of clarity or understanding a couple years ago. And I kind of understood like this oneness with the universe and a very loving kindness kind of situation. And I understood what my higher purpose was, which is to kind of go out there and help people help themselves find their wholeness inside, whether they know it or not. It's there and the light that they have inside, whether they can see it. And that's been kind of my daily existence for the last 2 years, 2+ years now. Um, and it's been a much better situation.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Just a side note, do you help other vets with what you're doing now?
I have a lot of friends that are vets, obviously. Like I've had my military friends and then all the people that I met when I was a civilian in all those places. And so I have a lot of people that are military or former military. And so I help people personally from time to time. Our community itself isn't centered around veterans, but there are people that have gone to war and are now on a spiritual path. So yes, but it's not necessarily the focus of what we do. But we're happy to help vets when we have a chance.
Well, you mentioned in your answer about the fact that you joined straight out of college. Do you think and look back about why it is that you joined?
I think that I I had always wanted to do so. I saw Lawrence of Arabia when I was a kid, and I'm like, I want to do that. I want to do what he did, and I wanted to go to the desert. And I was fascinated by Jack Ryan, just like kids are, Tom Clancy, and I wanted to do intelligence, and I was fascinated by terrorism and counterterrorism, kind of why they did it, why they felt the need to do it, and I didn't really understand it all. And so that interested me as well. So I joined for a lot of reasons, and I also knew that if I went to college straight out of high school, that I probably would have wasted my time and money and other people's time and money if I'd have gone to college. And so I realized that the army would make me go to work every day. So um, that was also a consideration, but mainly it was a need to kind of go satisfy this ideological and inquisitive nature of myself.
And are you glad that you did join?
That's a great question, Thomas. Yeah, I am. I don't think that I wouldn't be the person that I am today if I hadn't done what I did. I wouldn't have met my wife of 20 years, over 20 years now. And I've helped a lot of people, uh, been able to mentor people in my time in the military. I made a lot of uh good relationships. I was part of a great darkness, the military industrial complex, but uh and so I kind of have to live with that. But I don't think I would change any of it because I think seeing that darkness it helps contrast the light and see the light as well. So no, I think that I would say that I would do it again.
Okay, thank you for the answer. I think in terms of the terminology, I think you've got this great body of knowledge about what it means. I think for the most part, people understand what it means to be in the army, or at least they think that they do, and also perhaps in the Marines. But in terms of counterintelligence, I think that there's maybe some Jack Bauer kind of connotations there. What
Sure.
does it mean on a day-to-day basis? Like, what does your day look like?
It's a lot of paperwork. When we went through the schoolhouse and we were in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and our instructors used to tell us the first thing they told us was, "You guys aren't James Bond, so don't get it out of your head." Um, there's some interesting stuff. There's surveillance. There's counter surveillance. There is meeting human intelligence sources and trying to get them to give you information. There's a lot of learning how to lie and and manipulate people. It's all very there is a lot of cloak and dagger aspects to it. But really it is a lot of paperwork. It's it's really what it is designed to do is to prevent other nations and foreign intelligence services from spying on our country and our allies. And and to also do some work to collect intelligence And then if you do find out someone's spying, to maybe help manipulate that situation in your favor by passing material or fake information, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting job. It can be really high level, it can be really low level, it can be all the way from like nation state type stuff and regions down to talking to low level people on the battlefield. So it's a very ranging profession. Uh, and I kind of ran the gamut on it and did high level stuff and did low level stuff. You know, there were times that I lived out on the economy in Kuwait City. I spent a lot of time working at the embassy and did some high level stuff in Iraq, and then in Afghanistan. A lot of my stuff was very tactical, very um, immediate type stuff. So I kind of had a big range to it.
Well, how to manipulate people is a very interesting topic. Have you, as a result of your training, have you noticed anything in, let's say, everyday life that you think, that resembles something that I was taught once?
I think, yeah, I think that when you're taught to manipulate people, you start to look around you and see, well, who else is manipulating people? Like, you know, it does open your eyes, right? That you're trained. It's funny, like all U.S. Army courses are taught at, I think, the eighth grade level. So here we are being taught counterintelligence at the eighth grade level, and middle school level, and but we're being taught to lie, we're being taught to manipulate. All for good reasons. I mean, there's a logic to it, there's a common sense to it, and then you see that you see that the government you know does this on purpose, and you see that corporations do this on purpose. So you see that there is this effort out there to, I mean, you can see it on Madison Avenue, right? And the marketing complex of that grew out of marketing and sales from Madison Avenue, and the whole Mad Men thing, where getting someone to change a want into a need. I mean, that's essentially the same thing, right? It's trying to appeal to someone's core base, whatever, to get them to shift allegiances and thought over to your perspective. So yeah, I think it has opened my eyes into the manipulation that occurs at various levels of our society.
So, in another industry, if you moved over to advertising, you'd be a bit dangerous then.
I think I could probably sell things. Maybe I don't know. My dad was a regional sales rep for a very large corporation before I was born. So I guess it's probably in my DNA somewhere.
Well, all of my questions are not asking for anything that would be perceived as confidential. But do
Sure.
you have any stories that you can share in relation to, let's say, your more favored ones or more ones that you are proud of for your time as a counterintelligence agent?
I think that uh, I think the most important thing that we did, um, our one of our main jobs was to try to keep people safe, was to collect information, uh, analyze it, and act on it in a way that would keep people safe. And that happened at various levels in my career. And I would say that my time in Afghanistan was probably the most meaningful to me. And uh, I guess I was part of this unit there that what we did was we collected information. We tried to get people to act on it, uh, and go out and like neutralize the bad guys for us, and capture them or whatever. And it was very difficult to find people who, because they were all busy doing their own things, and so we kind of had to build our own capability to do it. And it was this very unique thing in Afghanistan. It was our unit kind of rose, um, and kind of did its own thing and found our own way, and we kind of just made it up and did it. And I think that in doing so, we protected a lot of people. There were like 50,000 people on Kandahar Airfield at the time. That's a lot of lives.
Would you mind telling me about the Bronze Star?
Yeah, when I was in Kuwait, when I was a soldier, I was a very low ranking soldier, E4 in the army, and for the work that I did on counterintelligence and counterterrorism in Kuwait, I was awarded a Bronze Star for um the things that I did, which was pretty rare for a junior enlisted person. So definitely, I'm definitely proud of that. I don't talk about it much, but it's something that is definitely something that meant something to me, especially having skipped college, and it's nice to have something to say, oh, okay, I did that.
And was that to do with the 50,000 lives that you were referring to?
No, that was in Kuwait, and that was uh, a different time for me. That was more strategic. Like we were trying to prevent a hostile foreign nation uh, that was trying to do bad things to us in Kuwait, and also uh, like global extremists, like Al Qaeda type extremists that were targeting our troops and stuff in Kuwait. So it was that was kind of a different situation. It was a little more operational, strategic type stuff there.
All serious stuff, John.
It was serious. It was an interesting career. I it was there I did a lot of interesting things. That probably I've thought about writing a book about all that once upon a time. I don't know if I ever will, but that was like I almost lived a whole life before I was 35. I used to work 110 hours a week, 7 days a week. It was an extreme experience, even if I didn't kind of realize how extreme it was at the time.
Often, what I ask military people is because there's a lot of crossover from the things you learn in the military to, let's say, business, for example. But is there anything that you took skills wise that you use today in your current role?
Absolutely. I I was I was really good at my job. I read everything that I could. I was I was a driven professional as it was. Like I was in the military, I was a soldier and then a civilian after, but I was very committed to doing this job, and I was really good at it, and I had the respect of my peers and my superiors. And so I can relate to high powered professionals. I can relate to people that uh when I used to walk into a room, people would stop and listen to what I had to say, even as a junior enlisted, E4 soldier. And so I can relate to people that had kind of these high intense, high powered jobs in the world from that time. And I think it's useful to have that perspective coming from a spiritual perspective now, to be able to talk to people and translate things. I think it's important to be able to speak common languages, even if we're speaking the same language, we're speaking different languages sometimes. So
Mm.
I think that's extremely helpful for me.
And did you get that same sense of brotherhood that often people get?
Yeah, every time Veterans Day comes up, I always think, and sometimes I'll reach out to friends or post about it on my social media, but I'll tell them, ultimately, once you're over there and you're in it, and you think about why you did it, and you wonder why you did it for so long. I think that I, you know, at the end of the day, we did it for our country. Yes, we did it for a lot of reasons, but at the end of the day, we did it for each other. And I think that that brotherhood and sisterhood, those men and women that I served with for all those years in the desert, that's something that is extremely meaningful. And um, I find that that bond is it truly is a brotherhood and sisterhood.
And what would you say are some of the mainstream misconceptions about the situation in Afghanistan?
Yeah, we could do a whole podcast on that. But I would say that we didn't lose Afghanistan. There was nothing to win. I think that Afghanistan was a forgotten war once we invaded Iraq. And I'm out of politics these days. I don't really get into politics anymore. I will say that I don't think that we should have invaded Iraq. I think it was a really bad idea. But Afghanistan was forgotten. I mean, we're talking uh like almost less than 18 months after 9/11, we're rolling in across the Burman from Kuwait into Iraq, and Afghanistan suddenly was a forgotten war, almost like Korea until 2009, when Iraq started to quiet down. So people just forgot about Afghanistan for like 6 or 7 years, and it wasn't on anyone's radar. I mean, I was in video teleconferences in Iraq, in Baghdad, and the Afghan guys would come on and they would say something and people would literally kind of chuckle because no one cared what they said because that war didn't matter. So I think that completely changed the tone of what we could have done in Afghanistan or should have done. Uh, I think that going in to get rid of Al Qaeda, it kind of had to happen because Afghanistan was like this virtual buffet of terrorism. It wasn't just Al Qaeda. It was, you had like 50 different, terrorist groups from almost every region of the world. That's why the whole world was happy for us to go do this thing after 9/11. So how we left Afghanistan this last time and how it ended, I know people that died when that happened. I mean, there were people that I knew from my time, they're Afghans. And it was a tragic way to see it end the way that it did. I'm not saying that we should have stayed. But how it happened was, I don't think, a great thing. Um, but I can say this, and I would want people to know this. When I was there, when an Afghan looked at you, didn't matter if they were Taliban, didn't matter if they were government, Afghan government, side, whatever side they were on, when they looked at you, it wasn't like they were looking at you like they would beat you. It was like they were looking through you in a way that they knew that they'd already won. Like, and that they didn't care that we were there in any meaningful sort of way. Um, it's a different place. I mean, we're talking about a landlocked country with deserts and mountains. So I think that Afghanistan, I call it the swamp of sadness. It's a very sad place. Uh, and we weren't, we can't lose something when there was really no definition of victory, right? So,
Mm.
um, I guess that's kind of my thoughts on Afghanistan.
Well, thank you for that. I know it's not the most, as you say, you like to stay out of certain topics, but I do think having informed, I don't know if opinions is the right word, but informed knowledge about a
Sure.
particular place is better than just, people speculating about things. So I appreciate your answer.
Yeah,
In
absolutely.
terms of the swamp of sadness, it sort of reminds me of this before and after that I referred to it as, in terms of you will, it's almost like going from one end of a spectrum to the other, in the sense that you were involved in some very serious stuff, and now you're, I would say, like a very spiritual dude. Um, what's the thinking that goes from one end to the other like that? How can you share that with us?
Yeah, and I actually appreciate you asking all those questions because a lot of people won't even talk about it. So I think it's nice to actually for people to hear about it. So thank you for that. And I think that, having gone through all that darkness and been through the trauma and the depression and the anxiety and everything that came with it, you know, it's I think that's a lot of times you end up with people that are in the self-help business, the spiritual business, religious, whatever, whatever, they're out there trying to help people. And I think a lot of the people that are doing that have seen darkness. They've gone through their own trauma. They've gone, a lot of times they've seen something in the world that triggered this thing inside them. And sometimes not, but often. And so I think that's why it's valuable to me, is because it took me a long time to journey through the world and get through that darkness, even though I kind of didn't know I was in it sometimes, right? Uh, and then coming out the other side and still not being healed for 7 years. It took 7 years after I'd been there, overseas for 15 years. So we're talking like 22 years later, um, or whatever. My desire is to say, well, that's a lot of stuff that happened. How can I shorten someone's trip through it, or uh, help them find their own way? I think that's what it's about for me, is, and also having been part of something like the Western military industrial complex, you know, when you're part of something that's that dark. And don't be wrong, I think that the US and the West does some really good things. So I'm not completely, but it's still dark. I think that you want to give back to the world. I want to give back to the world. And so that's part of it too. It's me wanting to give back to the world, uh, set the balance of the universe right for myself. I believe in and the balance of the universe and light and dark and karma. And so I think looking at that journey, that's how I look at it with where I was and where I'm going. I think I can help people help themselves because I think that, you know, everybody needs to be empowered within themselves. No two spiritual paths are going to look the same. I think an atheist can be spiritual. I think, you know, a religious person can be spiritual, or if you're just a spiritualist, right? So I think that's kind of a complicated answer to that question.
I appreciate the answer. It gives me loads of follow-up. But before we move on from that part of your life, when is it that you decide to leave, and what are the thoughts that are going on in your head around that time?
You know, no one ever asked me that question. You're the first person. I've been on a lot of podcasts. You're the first person that has ever asked me that question. And I always thought about how I would answer it, but I will answer it truthfully. I got fired. Um, and I'd been doing this job for 12 years out of 15 years. I've been, you know, I was really good at my job, but the base had stopped getting attacked as much. It was pretty safe. They started saluting, and my wife, a good friend of mine, and my wife, we all worked in the same unit, and the war was changing. Things were different. You know, things had just changed. They didn't really need us anymore. And we were expendable. We were contractors. Um, and we were kind of just discarded. Uh, and so it was a it was a very difficult time in my life. I had a bad commander. I'd always had good commanders, and I'd had a bad commander, and and then there were some other characters that were in the equation. It was just one of those perfect storms, and I ended up without a job.
Well, thank you for uh, being transparent about it.
Yeah.
Did you, I mean, how did you take it, and did you feel it was justified?
I don't think it was justified. I think there's probably plenty they could have fired me for the 6.5 years that I've been there, you know. One of those situations where I think we all do stuff that's probably justifiable to get rid of at some point. But no, I didn't feel it was justified. I was pretty heartbroken. I'd worked for this unit for 6.5 years. I'd helped build it. Um, I mean, we won, for perspective, we won DoD Counterterrorism Team of the Year 2 years in a row for Department of Defense. We were the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. They're kind of like NCIS. We were their large detachment of the year for 2 out of 3 years, with a runner-up in the middle. And I mean, we were a major unit doing big things, and a lot of that I had really helped a lot with. I was very central to a lot of that. I don't mind saying that. So it hurt. It hurt bad, and I got fired via email. Um, so that made it even harder.
Very
Uh,
impersonal.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, and you know, I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was a civilian, but you know, I still had a lot of loyalty to my country. I still had a lot of loyalty to my unit. So yeah, it was one of those things where, and my whole identity was tied up in my job that I've been doing for 15 years, and most of that in the desert at war. So yeah, I was very lost. I didn't even know who I was when I went home. Like I had no idea who I was outside of, like, you know, when you're directing troops on the ground and you're telling planes where to go, and you're, you know, all this intelligence that you're, you know, it's this like, and you also like, I used to go to the VA and they would say, well, are you addicted to alcohol or drugs? And I'd be like, I'm addicted to war. Like that's that's hard to say. I can say it now.
Mm.
I was a war junkie. You know, uh, it's actually a pretty good movie it's actually a comedy drama. It's got Tina Fey in it. It's called Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. It actually deals with war, being addicted to war. And Sebastian Junger, who uh, did a documentary. I think he was stationed with he was a journalist, a writer stationed with a unit for about 18 months. He talks about being addicted to war as well. He's in a TED talk on it. Um, but yeah, that was kind of how it all ended up. And you know, I needed to leave. You know, I was messed up. I was I was still professional mostly, but you know, once you've been at war for 12 years, you can't be a functional human really anymore. So it was definitely time for me to go.
So how long did they give you, and what do you do on day one?
Well, it was immediate because I mean, I have a top secret security clearance, and whenever you're terminated, they just, kick you out in the cold. It was around Christmas time, so all the planes were full. So I just kind of had to sit around Afghanistan for about 2, 3 weeks waiting for a plane out. Um, so it was just kind of a miserable thing there for a while. I actually flew back to from Kandahar to Dubai on Christmas Eve, and I ended up landing in DFW in Dallas with my wife. We both got back together on Christmas Day of 2014.
Christmas Day. Okay. That's a
Yeah.
strange day to come back on.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Not a lot going on, not many shops open. Um,
No.
but I guess this is that period from then on is the beginning of your 7 years. Is that right?
Yeah, the next 7 years, I just tried to heal. That first year I was back, like I said, I went to the VA. I actually ended up getting paired with a therapist, counselor who practiced Eastern faith, Eastern medicine, which is super rare in the VA system, uh, or any medical system, really. And so that introduced me to mindfulness meditation and some other things that uh, I couldn't fully wrap my head around at the time, but I think definitely stuck in my head and helped me a bit, until I finally was able to kind of get my feet back under me a little bit.
So if you were to summarize should we say, the journey you went on in that 7 years, going from, would you say, dealing with trauma initially, to the point
Yeah.
where you're at now? How would you summarize that period of your life?
Yeah, it's a very difficult period in my life. Like I'd gotten out of the desert and the swamp of sadness of Afghanistan, but I was still stuck right in the swamp. Like I just couldn't move out of it. And I had PTSD or complex PTSD, whatever you want to call it. I had hypervigilance, uh, depression. I even have OCD. I even had probably still have OCD developed. I had a host of I have Gulf War syndrome and all kinds of other physical ailments that come along with being over there for so long. So it was it was a really kind of dark journey for me. I never gave up. I'm a positive person, even though I was had all these problems. I had moments of positivity because I was always kind of a positive person, and I always tried to lead with kindness. And so I think that really helped me not completely lose myself. Is that I still had this inner positivity, even though I was going through all this pain and suffering. I think it really helped sustain me, and so I did end up as a statistic.
And I think my interpretation of one of your previous answers is that you now have the ability to help someone who might be going through the same thing as what you went through. So if you could speak to someone who needed help and they were in the position that you were in, day one they get back, what advice do you give them?
I would say that slow things down, uh, and I would say have grace for yourself, and know that you're the most important thing to you, and so self love is going to be really important, and that time will help because I think time is an underrated aspect sometimes in healing, and that there's going to be some work that has to be done on how we feel and what we're attached to. Letting go is this big thing of attachments to forgiving ourselves, forgiving others, judging ourselves, judging others. This idea of letting go is very powerful. And so um, I think I would start by saying those things, and also understanding that if it was someone that's been through kind of institutional existence, especially the military, I would say, that we're conditioned to believe that we're okay, to keep going, to fight, to fight through it, uh, and that we have to kind of put that aside. And we're also in our society. I don't think our society teaches self care, self love very well. So Those are all the things I would start with as a kind of a base.
And how do you practice those things now, self-care or self-love?
Yeah, self-care is really important to me. I try to make sure that every day that I put myself first, because I don't think that I'm any good to anybody else. I'm not good to myself. I'm not good to my wife. I'm not good to anybody that I'm talking to from a spiritual perspective, guidance perspective. I'm a certified professional coach now too. Um, I'm not good to anyone if I don't have that self-care. I'm not good to anyone if I don't have love of myself. And if I love myself, I start by I remind myself through verbal affirmations. I think the spoken word has a lot of power, tremendous power, and especially if we can wake up in the morning and talk to ourselves a little bit. Um, I meditate. Uh, I do mindfulness meditation. I do I do bathing meditation a couple times a week. Bath pillow, hot bath, candles, that kind of thing. Take care of myself. Try to exercise, eat well, sleep right. Because I think that we can't have a spiritual journey that is super meaningful if we're not also grounded, centered in this day-to-day reality that we occupy. So I think there's that intersection between lifestyle and spirituality. And if we're taking care of ourselves, suddenly we have more room to kind of be spiritual, think about what our connection is with the universe and all that kind of stuff.
Well, this gets into perhaps the after part of your story. The I think the word spirituality is used differently, or means different things to different people. So, how would you define that word, or how do you use it?
I think it's anything that a person does to see a connection to something that is beyond their prototypical physical self. So I think it could range from anything from consciousness, just base consciousness, which science is yet to explain. Like science kind of knows it exists, but science still can't get behind consciousness yet. So it could range from consciousness to, you could call it super consciousness or the divine or the capital S self, the divine self inside or the divine. Uh, I would I would use any of that and say that it's a very broad term. It's almost so broad as to be almost unusable at times. So I think we have to approach it like that and talk about it like that. So I love that question.
It's kind of like good or bad. The word is so general; it's actually quite difficult to define.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, this is one from your profile. It sounds like an interesting question. What is the stream of unconsciousness?
Yes. We have all these things that when we're young, we're told that we're this or we're that or we're not this. And, we do this or don't do that. All it's taught to us by our parents, by our teachers, and then by our coworkers eventually, friends that we're all these things and that we're supposed to do, or that we can't do and we should do. And so all these layers that kind of build up on us over time. And that's the stream of unconsciousness, this pull of society that pulls us down this way that everything's supposed to go. And we kind of have to take a step out of that stream of consciousness and think, who am I? Like, what am I? Like, what are my values? What do I believe in? What are my beliefs? What am I separate from all of this? And I don't think that we ask those questions or think about it in those terms. And so that's kind of how I see the stream of unconsciousness.
Do you think it's sort of similar to the phrase where people are like sleepwalking into things? Things are just happening
Absolutely.
to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be a very warm thing, safe. It's, you know, the mind and the ego have kept us alive for thousands of years. And, you know, in doing so, it doing the safe thing, doing the thing that's always been done. I think that it's the easy way. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily a bad thing. I think that it's worth asking the question of, should I step out of it and look around?
And the opposite of that, presumably, is like your higher purpose. Have you got thoughts you can share on your higher purpose?
I really believe deeply in higher purpose or dharma. I think that we each have a higher purpose in life that's probably unique to ourselves. I think that it can change throughout our life. And I think that if if we don't know what our higher purpose is, like, what do we want? Like, what do we need? What's our soul saying to us, or our inner self, our base intuition saying that it wants or needs to do, that most fits and aligns with what we are as a being. Uh, so mine may be helping other people find their way, you know, and it it's if we can find it, that's great. We should work on finding it, figuring out what it is. But then once we know it, once we figure out what our higher purpose is, how is it aligned with our daily life? Are we living our higher purpose? Is it aligned with how we live our life? Are our values that we have things that we're actually doing and living? And is it especially aligned? Is it aligned with our vocation or job, because we spend so much time at work? So if we're not doing something that aligns with what we want to do and want to be or need to be, then we're going to be, I think, extremely unhappy.
Would you say that's one of the things which actually helped you recover is figuring out your higher purpose and then making sure it aligns with your daily activity?
Absolutely. I think that knowing what it was and then saying, I'm going to go do this with my life, has absolutely been fundamentally life changing in every way.
It's amazing. And I keep using the phrase, but I just think the contrast or the before and after of your story is amazing. And I really appreciate you sharing it. Is there anything that I should have asked you about today?
No, you're a really great host, and you ask very thoughtful questions. So I definitely appreciate the conversation.
And if people want to hire you or get in touch, where do they go?
Our main website for our community is kishar.org, KISHAR.org. And they can find links to get into our spiritual community there, or get us for one-on-one guidance or coaching sessions, and all of our socials. And we have a decent YouTube channel. It's got a lot of good advice and spiritual guidance on it as well. It's free and very artful, so check that out as well.
John, do you have any closing thoughts for us today?
I always try to tell people that don't chase perfection. Uh, in this world, we all walk together. Perfect's probably not going to happen. There's that perfection within us, connected to the universe or divine or whatever. Probably you can connect to that, but don't try to just walk perfection in our real world. It's not something we need to do. There's more time. We have more time than we think. And again, love yourself. I would say that's the advice that I would give people.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you for your contribution in general, and thank you for being a great podcast guest.
Yeah, thank you for being a great podcast host.